Bridget did not know it yet, but this morning, this quiet, careful morning, would be the last moment her secret belonged only to her. By nightfall, it would no longer be possible to hide. By the end of the day, something sacred between her and her husband would be tested in a way neither of them had prepared for, and whatever followed could not be undone. Bridget had both hands locked around the back of the chair before her maid, Prudence, even touched the laces, not resting them there, gripping. Her fingers were white. Her shoulders were already tense, as if her body understood the danger long before her mind allowed it a name. "Says again," Bridget said, steady but quiet. "Start again." Prudence paused behind her. The room was warm, warmer than it should have been for early morning. But Bridget's skin felt cold beneath the thin cotton of her shift. Candlelight softened the walls, but it did nothing to ease the tightness coiled beneath her ribs. "Your Grace," Prudence said carefully. "We've already—" "I know," Bridget swallowed, "but it isn't enough." Prudence's hands rested at the small of her back, unmoving. Bridget stared straight ahead, deliberately avoiding her reflection. She did not look at the bed. She did not look at the window where early light crept in like an unwelcome witness. She focused on breathing, slowly, carefully, as if control alone could undo what her body had already decided. "Can't you make it tighter?" Bridget asked. The words landed differently this time. Prudence knew it. She had dressed women for decades, nervous brides, fainting debutantes, ladies who wished to be admired, envied, reduced. This was not that. This was fear. Prudence leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Your Grace, this is not about fashion." Bridget's grip tightened. "I know exactly what it is," she said, "and that is why it must be tighter." Prudence closed her eyes briefly. There it was. Not vanity, not pride. Denial. "You cannot bind away what your body is doing," Prudence said gently. "And you cannot pretend it will stop simply because you ask it to." Bridget did not answer, because answering meant admitting it aloud, and once spoken, it could never be taken back. Behind them, the door creaked softly. Both women froze. Bridget did not turn. She knew the sound of her husband's footsteps, the rhythm, the pause at the threshold, the courtesy he always showed. Except today, the steps stopped. Then silence. Prudence's eyes flicked toward the door, then back to Bridget's reflection, pale, composed, holding herself together by sheer will. "His Grace has been awake since dawn," Prudence said carefully. The servants noticed. Bridget's jaw tightened. Humphrey had not slept well since their marriage. Everyone knew that, though no one said it aloud. He rose early, worked late, never failed in kindness, never raised his voice, never crossed a boundary he had not been invited to cross, and yet burdened by something he carried alone. "He will not come in," Bridget said. "He never does." Prudence said nothing, because that too was true. Humphrey, Duke of Ashbourne, did not enter his wife's bedchamber without invitation, had not once. Not since the night 3 months ago when restraint had failed them both. The night Bridget had believed they had been careful enough. She had counted the days. She had been sure. She had been wrong. Prudence took a careful breath. "Your Grace, how long do you intend to hide this?" Bridget's reflection wavered. "I don't know," she said. "Just a little longer." "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Prudence's fingers curled around the laces again, but this time she did not pull. "Does His Grace know?" she asked. Bridget shook her head. Quickly, not in fear. "No, we agreed," she said. "We both did. And you believed?" "That we had done what we could," Bridget finished quietly. Prudence's expression softened. Many women have believed the same. As if summoned by the words, movement stirred in the corridor. A murmur of voices, the sound of Giles, the butler, issuing instructions in his calm, measured tone. The house was awake now, watching, waiting. Bridget straightened her spine. "Tighten it," she said again. Please. Prudence hesitated only a moment longer. Then she pulled. Bridget sucked in a sharp breath, her hands slipping briefly on the chair before she found her grip again. There, Prudence said firmly. That is as far as I will go. It isn't enough. It must be. Bridget closed her eyes. Inside her, something shifted. Not pain, not yet, but a presence that refused to be ignored. The truth had settled quietly, and it was not going anywhere. Before Prudence could speak again, the door opened fully. Humphrey was there. He did not hesitate. He did not wait at the threshold. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, already dressed for the day, coat immaculate, but his eyes, light blue and searching, went straight to her. Bridget? His voice was warm, concerned. His hand came up to her cheek, thumb brushing her skin with a tenderness that made her throat tighten. I was having trouble with the stays, Bridget managed, leaning into his touch despite herself. Humphrey frowned, his gaze dropping to her waist, then back to her face. You look pale, he said, and you're cold. He stepped closer, protective, solid. I'm fine, Humphrey. Truly. You are not fine, he said gently. He looked to Prudence. Has she eaten? Not yet, Your Grace. His attention returned to Bridget. Sit down, she tried to protest. He was already guiding her to the bed, his hand lingering in her hair, smoothing a stray lock back into place. I have business with the tenants, he said quietly, eyes never leaving hers. But if you are unwell, tell me. I will stay. He would. She knew that, and that knowledge hurt more than fear ever could. No, she whispered. Go, I just need air. He studied her for a moment longer. Then he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Lingering, affectionate, unguarded. I will have the carriage readied later, he murmured. Take care of yourself. He turned to Prudence. See that she eats. Then he left. The silence he left behind was not empty. It was heavy with guilt. Bridget sagged against the bedpost, her hand rising to the place where his lips had been. He knows something is wrong, Prudence said softly. Bridget nodded. I know. And this, Prudence continued, placing a respectful hand over Bridget's stomach, will not remain hidden. Not from a man who loves you like that. Bridget covered her hand. I love him, she said, the words breaking free. And I would never break a promise I made to him. Prudence met her gaze. Then you must trust that love when the truth comes. Bridget closed her eyes. Outside, the house continued breathing. Inside, the secret waited. And somewhere down the corridor, Humphrey stopped walking just for a moment. As if he felt it too, Humphrey did not go far. He told himself he was leaving the house, told himself the tenants were waiting, that the steward would expect him, that the day required his presence elsewhere. But his steps slowed halfway down the corridor, then stopped. He stood there, one hand resting against the carved paneling, listening to the quiet pulse of the house, the distant clatter of the kitchens, the low murmur of servants beginning their morning rounds. And something beneath it, something wrong. Bridget had said she was fine. She always said she was fine. Humphrey exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Marriage had taught him many things in a short span of time, not least that Bridget did not exaggerate. She did not dramatize. If she said little, it was because she was protecting something, or someone. He continued on, forcing his pace to resume its normal rhythm. If he turned back now, he would be hovering, he would be pressing, and Bridget had never responded well to being pressed. Not by anyone. Still, by the time he reached the front steps, his jaw was tight. The carriage ride passed in a blur of polite conversation and ledgers he barely registered. He listened. He answered. He nodded when expected. All the while, his mind returned to the image he could not shake. Her hands gripping the chair, her skin cold beneath his palm, the way she had leaned into his touch, not as comfort, but as if bracing herself. By mid-morning, he cut the visit short. I will return tomorrow, he told the tenant, already standing. See that the repairs proceed as discussed. The man blinked, startled. Of course, Your Grace. Humphrey was already reaching for his coat. Bridget sat at the small escritoire by the window, the untouched tray of food growing cold beside her. Prudence watched her with a patience born of long service. You must eat something, Prudence said gently. I will, Bridget replied, and then did not move. Her gaze remained fixed on the gardens beyond the glass. The roses were just beginning to bud, too early for full bloom, too early for certainty, much like everything else. Your Grace, Prudence ventured. His Grace will return sooner than expected. Bridget's fingers stilled against the edge of the desk. I know. And when he does, Bridget swallowed, I will still be his wife. Prudence's expression softened. You always will be. That's not what I mean. Prudence did not press. The silence stretched until the sound of carriage wheels cut through the air. Bridget's breath caught. Too early. She stood at once, the motion sharp enough that Prudence reached out instinctively. Careful, Prudence said. I'm fine, Bridget insisted, then stopped herself. She took a slower breath, sat back down. The door downstairs opened. Humphrey's voice followed. Low, polite, unmistakably his. He was home. Bridget did not rise when he entered the room moments later. Humphrey paused in the doorway, surprised to find her seated so deliberately, her posture composed but guarded. The tray beside her had not been touched. Bridget, he said softly, you should have sent word. I would have returned sooner. You did return sooner, she replied. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not accusation, not defensiveness. Recognition. Yes, he said. I did. He crossed the room slowly, deliberately, stopped in front of her. You haven't eaten? I wasn't hungry. Humphrey did not argue. He simply reached for the teacup, testing it with his fingers. Cold, he observed. She watched him carefully now. He set the cup back down. May I sit? The question was unnecessary. She nodded. He took the chair opposite her, folding his hands loosely between his knees. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, quietly, something is troubling you. Bridget opened her mouth, closed it again. Humphrey waited. I don't want to lie to you, she said at last. His breath stilled. Then don't. But I also don't know how to speak without breaking something. He leaned forward slightly, not touching her, but close enough that his presence anchored the space between them. You are not responsible for protecting me from the truth, he said gently. Her eyes lifted to his. You are kind, she whispered. Too kind. That is not a flaw, he replied. She almost laughed, almost cried. Humphrey, she said, voice low, did you ever imagine that marriage would feel like this? He considered. Like what? Like walking across thin ice, she said, knowing it will hold, until it doesn't. His gaze sharpened. You are not fragile, he said, nor is what we have. She shook her head faintly. You don't understand. Then help me. The door opened softly. Prudence paused, took in the scene and quietly withdrew without a word. Bridget noticed. So did Humphrey. He exhaled slowly. You see, Bridget said, her voice steadying as resolve settled in. Everyone notices before the words are spoken. Humphrey's eyes did not leave her face. What would you have me notice? She hesitated. Just a breath too long. He saw it. Not certainty, not proof, but alignment, her pallor, the stays, the way she avoided her reflection, the warmth of the room, the untouched food, and the night 3 months ago when restraint had failed them both, not recklessly, but lovingly, carefully. Enough, they had thought. His voice was very quiet when he spoke again. Bridget, he said, are you unwell? She met his gaze, really met it. No, she said. A pause. I am not. Relief flickered across his face. And then something else followed. Something deeper. Something more dangerous. Then why, he asked gently, does it feel as though you are saying goodbye to something? Her breath trembled. I'm saying goodbye, she whispered. Just not to you. Silence. Humphrey rose slowly from his chair. He did not touch her. He did not demand. He simply stood there, the weight of his attention unmistakable. Whatever this is, he said evenly, we will face it together. Bridget's chest tightened painfully. You don't know that, she said. I married you, he replied. That was not conditional. Her eyes filled, not with fear, but with love sharp enough to hurt. Outside, the house breathed on. Inside, the space between truth and confession narrowed, and neither of them could stop it now. Humphrey did not turn around when the door closed behind him. He stood in the corridor longer than was necessary, long enough for the servants to pretend not to notice, long enough for the quiet to thicken, then resumed walking as though nothing had happened at all, which was, in its way, the most dangerous lie of the morning. Bridget remained seated where he had left her. She did not move at once. Her hand rested lightly over her abdomen now. Not protectively. She was not ready for that. But unconsciously, as though her body no longer trusted her mind to remember what mattered. Prudence watched her from across the room. He nearly stayed, the maid said quietly. Bridget swallowed. Yes. And you let him go? Yes. Prudence hesitated. You did not owe him silence. Bridget lifted her gaze, eyes steady but shining. I owe him honesty, she said. And honesty is not something I can give in pieces. Prudence did not argue. Because this was not cowardice. It was restraint, and restraint, Bridget had learned, was its own form of courage. The house moved differently after that. Servants passed her with more care than usual. Doors closed more softly. Voices lowered when she entered a room. Whatever Humphrey had seen in her face that morning, whatever concern he carried with him now, it had settled into the bones of the household. Bridget felt it everywhere. She took tea alone in the small sitting room overlooking the east garden, where frost still clung to the hedges like a warning. She forced herself to eat a piece of toast. She kept her posture straight. She did not vomit. That, at least, felt like a small mercy. The carriage did not leave. She noticed this when the hour passed at which Humphrey ordinarily rode out to inspect the southern tenants, when another hour followed, when the sound of hooves never came. Her chest tightened. He was staying, not for her, for something he had not yet named. That made it worse. It was just past noon when the knock came again. Not tentative this time, not uncertain. No. Bridget looked up from the ledger she had been pretending to read. Come in, she said. The door opened. Humphrey stood there, coat removed, sleeves rolled back slightly. An informal detail that made her heart stutter before she could stop it. He looked as though he had tried to occupy himself and failed. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said. You're not. He glanced at the untouched tea beside her. You didn't finish. I will. He accepted that answer without comment, which somehow felt like a kindness. I was told, he said carefully, that you declined the carriage. I did. May I ask why? She hesitated. This was the moment, the one she had feared all morning, the simple question that demanded either evasion or truth. She chose neither. I wasn't certain I could tolerate the motion, she said. Humphrey went very still. Not alarmed, not accusatory. Listening. I see, he said at last. And she knew then, knew it in her bones, that he heard more than she had said. You should rest, he added quietly. I've rested. That isn't the same. Their eyes held. There was something different in his expression now. Not suspicion, not doubt. Calculation. Careful. Deliberate. The kind that weighed consequence before action. Walk with me, he said. It was not a request, but it was not an order either. Bridget stood. They did not go far. only as far as the long gallery, where tall windows admitted a pale, winter-bright light that flattened nothing and hid no one. Humphrey stopped near the center of the room. He did not face her at once. "I don't like not knowing," he said. Bridget folded her hands together, unfolded them again. "I know. And yet," he continued, turning now, "you are keeping something from me." She inhaled slowly. "Yes." He studied her face, her color, her posture, the way she held herself just a little too carefully. "This is not about the stays," he said. "No. And it is not a passing illness. No." He exhaled through his nose. Not a laugh, but something close to it. Something restrained. "You are very brave," he said. "Do you know that?" Her throat tightened. "I don't feel brave. Most people don't when they are." Silence stretched between them. This one was different, sharper, charged. "If I ask you directly," he said at last, "will you answer me?" Bridget closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Then she opened them again. "No," she said. Humphrey did not react at once. He did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He only nodded once. "Then I won't ask," he said. The relief hit her so hard she nearly swayed. He noticed. Of course he did. His hand lifted instinctively, then stopped, hovering between them, unfinished. "I don't want to frighten you," he said quietly. "But I also won't pretend I haven't noticed what my eyes are telling me." Her pulse thundered. "And what are they telling you?" she asked, before she could stop herself. His gaze dropped. Not to her face. Lower. Only for a heartbeat. Then he looked away, as though even the act of seeing too much carried risk. "That something has changed," he said, "and that you are carrying it alone." Bridget's vision blurred. She turned slightly as though the light had become too bright. "I won't," he added, voice firmer now, "force you to speak before you're ready." She nodded, grateful beyond words. "But," he continued, and her breath caught, "I will not allow you to suffer in silence under my roof." She looked at him then, really looked, at the restraint in his shoulders, the tension in his jaw, the way he was holding himself back, not from anger, but from fear. Fear of overstepping, fear of failing her. "You are not suffering," she said softly. His mouth curved, just barely. "You are a terrible liar," he replied. That almost made her smile. Almost. Footsteps approached. Decisive. Familiar. Humphrey turned first. A servant stood at the far end of the gallery, head bowed. "Your Grace," he said, "there has been a letter." Humphrey stiffened. "From whom?" The servant hesitated. "Your mother, sir." The air shifted. Bridget felt it immediately. The way Humphrey's attention snapped away from her, control sliding back into place. "I will take it in my study," he said. The servant withdrew. Humphrey turned back to Bridget. Whatever softness had been there moments ago was now carefully contained. "I'm sorry," he said. "This cannot wait." "I understand." He hesitated. Then, because he was still Humphrey, he added, "Will you remain here?" "Yes." "I'll return," he said, "if you'll allow it." "I will." He inclined his head once, formally, and left. The moment he was gone, Bridget's knees nearly gave out. She caught herself on the window ledge, breath shallow now that she was alone. The secret pressed heavier than ever, because now she knew something she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. Humphrey was not blind, and when the truth came, when it finally had to, it would not test only her courage. It would test the careful, painful restraint he had built his life upon. And the silence between them was already beginning to strain under the weight of what it was protecting. Humphrey did not open his mother's letter at once. He stood behind the desk in his study, the seal unbroken beneath his fingers, and let the room settle around him. The fire burned low. The tall windows admitted a thin winter light that made no effort to soften anything. Ordinarily, he would have sat. Ordinarily, he would have read. Instead, he remained standing. as though the act of stillness required vigilance. Bridget's face returned to him unbidden, not her words, not her composure, the way she had held herself too carefully, the way she had gone pale without complaint, the way her silence had felt intentional. Humphrey exhaled slowly and broke the seal. The letter was brief. His mother never indulged in excess when precision would wound more effectively. She wrote of concern, of propriety, of continuity. The word heirs appeared only once. That was enough. Humphrey folded the letter carefully and set it aside, his jaw tightening as though the paper itself carried weight beyond ink. So, that was the shape of it. He had known this question would surface eventually. It always did. What unsettled him was not the inquiry, but the way it arrived on a day already strained thin by things he could not yet name. When he left the study, he did not return immediately to Bridget. He paused in the corridor instead, one hand resting briefly against the wall as though grounding himself before moving on. Then he went to the east sitting room. Bridget stood by the window, the pale light outlining her profile. One hand rested lightly against the sill, her posture composed but not at ease. She turned when she sensed him. "You returned," she said. "I said I would." He crossed the room, stopping a careful distance away, close enough to be present, far enough not to intrude. "You should be resting," he said. Her mouth curved faintly. "You've already said that today." "And it remains true," he replied. She did not argue. He noticed that too. "I received a letter," he said. Her fingers tightened slightly against the sill. "From your mother?" "Yes." She nodded once, bracing herself. "She worries," Bridget said quietly. "She always has." Humphrey watched her as she spoke. The steadiness, the restraint, the way she met difficulty without flinching. "She worries about matters that are not hers to decide," he said. A pause. "And yet," Bridget said softly, "they are matters that weigh." "Yes," he agreed. "They do." She turned to face him fully then, her expression thoughtful. "I'm sorry if I've caused tension between you," she said. "That was never my intention." Something tightened in his chest. "You are not responsible for my mother's expectations," Humphrey said evenly, "nor for how I answer them." Her gaze flickered, not with relief, but with something closer to pain. "You carry these things alone," she said. "So do you," he replied. The silence that followed was dense, attentive, the kind that listened even when no one spoke. "Bridget," he said quietly, "this morning you chose your words very carefully." She did not deny it. "And when you told me you were not unwell," he continued, "I believed you." Her breath caught. "But," he added, voice steady, "I have been considering what you are unwell about." She inhaled slowly. "I don't want you to speculate," she said. "I won't," he replied at once. "That would be unfair." Her shoulders eased a fraction. "But I also cannot pretend," he continued, "that I feel nothing when I sense risk." She closed her eyes briefly. Only briefly. "I will tell you," she said. "I promise." His chest tightened. "Just not today." He nodded. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. "Then today," he said, "we will speak of other things." She searched his face. "You don't have to protect me from myself," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I choose to be careful." Something in her expression faltered. He stepped closer, not touching, not claiming, simply closing the distance so his presence could steady hers if she wished. "You are not alone in this house," he said. "Not in any way that matters." Her voice trembled despite herself. "You don't know what you're promising." "I know exactly what I'm promising," he said. "Patience, care, and restraint." She nodded once, twice. "Will you stay?" she asked quietly. Yes. He did not reach for her. He did not kiss her. He simply remained, solid, deliberate, as the afternoon light shifted and the unspoken truth pressed closer, contained only by the fragile discipline they both maintained. And somewhere within Humphrey, the familiar instinct to guard, to limit, to prevent, to hold back what might one day demand too much, tightened its hold once more. Not out of coldness, but out of fear learned long before Bridget had ever stood at that window. Bridget did not sleep. That, too, had become familiar. But this night carried a different weight. Not fear alone, but awareness. The kind that made even stillness feel like effort. She lay on her side, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house. Somewhere nearby, a fire shifted. A page turned. Footsteps crossed a room and paused, as though the person moving through it had reconsidered the necessity of motion at all. Humphrey was awake. He had stayed. Not in her bedchamber. Never that. But close enough that the space between them felt intentional rather than accidental. Her hand rested against the coverlet, then drifted lower, settling briefly where her body had begun to insist on being acknowledged. She stilled it there, not possessively, not protectively, only as if to remind herself that what she carried did not yet require permission to exist. Near dawn, the door opened softly. Prudence entered without knocking, her movements practiced, her expression already alert. "You're awake," she said quietly. Bridget nodded. "I never slept." Prudence set the basin down. His grace rose before the sun. He asked that you not be disturbed. A tightness gathered beneath Bridget's ribs. He shouldn't alter his day for me. Prudence's gaze lifted. He didn't ask whether he should. Bridget sat up slowly. The movement required more care than it had yesterday. She waited a breath too long before standing. Prudence noticed. "Does it pass?" she asked. "Yes," Bridget said. Then after a moment, "Eventually." That was enough honesty for the morning. Prudence helped her dress, loosening the stays just enough that Bridget could draw a full breath without calculation. "That will do," Prudence said when Bridget stiffened out of habit. Bridget nodded. "Thank you." The breakfast room was quiet when she entered. Humphrey stood by the window, a ledger open in his hands, though his attention was elsewhere. He turned the moment he sensed her. "You should have sent word," he said gently. "I would have come to you." "I can cross a room," Bridget replied lightly. "I know," he said. His gaze lingered anyway. He drew out a chair for her without ceremony. She sat, folding her hands together to keep them steady. The table was simply laid. Toast, tea, fruit, nothing that demanded. Humphrey poured the tea himself. "You don't have to watch me eat," Bridget said quietly. "I'm not," he replied. "I'm sitting with you." She lifted the toast, took a bite. Humphrey did not speak until she swallowed. "Thank you," he said. The word surprised her. "For what?" "For trusting me with the morning." Something in her chest tightened. They ate in silence for a few moments, not awkward, but deliberate. "I'll remain on the estate today," Humphrey said at last. "There's nothing that requires my absence." "You don't need to." "I want to," he said, "and I won't pretend otherwise." She nodded. When she set the toast down untouched again, he noticed. "You needn't finish it," he said. "I know." She took another bite anyway. It stayed. That mattered more than it should have. Later, when the house had settled, Humphrey found her in the east sitting room, standing by the window with one hand braced against the sill. "You should sit," he said. "I was only—" He stopped himself. "You look tired." She did not deny it. She sat. He remained standing, his posture easy but attentive. "I received my mother's letter," he said. Her fingers curled faintly. "I assumed you had." "It concerned expectations," he continued. "Nothing urgent. Nothing you need to answer." "I don't owe her." "You don't owe anyone anything," he said calmly. "Least of all explanations." She studied him. "You sound very certain." "I'm careful," he corrected. "There's a difference." She stood too quickly. The room tilted, only slightly. But it was enough. Humphrey crossed the space at once, stopping just short of touching her. "Bridget?" "I'm fine." He waited. "I need air," she said. "Then let me walk with you." Outside, the path was cool and even. Humphrey chose it without comment, adjusting his pace to hers instinctively. "You're accommodating me," she said. "I'm paying attention." They walked in silence. "Humphrey," she said. He stopped immediately. "Yes." Her heart pounded. The truth rose, urgent, unmanageable. She pressed her palm briefly against her abdomen, then dropped it as though the gesture itself were too revealing. "I don't want to disappoint you," she said instead. His face changed, not with surprise, but with pain. "You couldn't," he said. "I might," she whispered. He held her gaze. "Then I will adjust," he said. "Not retreat." A wave of dizziness followed her breath. She swayed. His hand closed around her elbow, firm, careful, grounding. "That's enough," he said quietly. "We're going inside." She did not argue. As he guided her back toward the house, his hand remained at her arm, protective, restrained, unmistakably afraid. And Bridget understood something she had been resisting all day. Silence had stopped being neutral. It was beginning to ask things of him, and she did not know how much longer she could allow that. The day settled into something careful. That was how Bridget thought of it later. Not quiet, not peaceful, but deliberate, as though every hour had been placed with intention, each movement weighed before it was allowed to happen. Humphrey did not leave her side. Not in the obvious way, not hovering, not watching, but he arranged himself around her presence, appearing when she paused, slowing when she faltered, adjusting the household's rhythm so subtly that no one could have named the change aloud. It was protection disguised as routine, and it made the silence heavier. By afternoon, Bridget's composure had begun to fray at the edges, not visibly, not enough that anyone else would notice, but she noticed. Her body had started to demand concessions she was no longer certain she could grant quietly. Fatigue lingered longer. Stillness felt less forgiving. Even standing required negotiation. She sat in the small library, pretending to read while the words blurred on the page. Humphrey entered without announcing himself. "You've been here a while," he said. She looked up. "Have I?" "Yes." He crossed the room, closing the book gently before she could protest. "That wasn't finished," she said. "You weren't reading it." She smiled faintly. "You're observant today." "I'm observant every day," he replied. "Today I'm less willing to look away." The words were gentle. Their implication was not. She set her hands in her lap, folding them together to keep them from drifting somewhere too revealing. "I don't want you to worry," she said. He studied her face, not searching for weakness, but measuring effort. "I don't worry," he said. "I calculate." That startled a laugh from her before she could stop it. "That sounds dreadful." "It can be," he said quietly. "But it keeps people safe." Something passed between them then, an understanding that did not yet have language. She rose carefully from the chair. "I think I'll take some air," she said. "I'll join you." "I don't need." He lifted a hand, not to stop her, but to slow the moment. "I know," he said. "I want to." Outside, the light had softened. The air held a sharpness that made breathing feel purposeful. They walked without speaking at first. Humphrey matched her pace instinctively, adjusting when she slowed, pausing when she paused. He did not touch her unless she faltered, and when she did, it was always brief, controlled, as though he feared that holding on too long might cross some invisible line. "You don't like walking with me," Bridget said suddenly. He stopped. "That isn't true?" "You're tense," she said, "as though you're waiting for something to go wrong." His jaw tightened. "I'm accustomed to anticipating consequence," he said. "From walking?" "From wanting," he corrected. The word landed heavily between them. She turned to face him. "You think wanting is dangerous?" His gaze did not waver. "I think wanting requires care." "That isn't an answer." "It's the only one I can give you today." She studied him. The restraint in his posture, The way his hands remained still at his sides, the effort it took for him not to reach for her. "You love me," she said. "Yes." The certainty in his voice made her chest ache. "And yet," she continued, "there are parts of yourself you keep locked." His breath shifted. "Because they are not harmless." She swallowed. "I don't believe that," she said. He held her gaze, something taut and unsaid tightening behind his eyes. "I hope you never have reason to," he replied. The words frightened her more than anger would have. They turned back toward the house in silence. Inside, the evening settled gently. Lamps lit, doors closed, voices lowered. Humphrey walked her to the sitting room and paused there. "I'll be nearby," he said, "as you have been all day." "Yes." She hesitated. "Humphrey?" He waited. "If I were to tell you something difficult," she said slowly, "would you let it change the way you look at me?" His answer was immediate. "No. And the way you feel?" That took longer. "I would let it change what I fear," he said. "Not what I love." Her throat tightened. She nodded once. That was all she could manage. Later that night, alone in her chamber, Bridget pressed her palm to her abdomen and allowed herself one unguarded breath. The truth pressed harder now, not because it demanded to be spoken, but because it was beginning to ask whether silence was still kindness, or whether it had become something else entirely. Down the corridor, Humphrey sat awake in his study long past midnight, hands folded, jaw set, calculating consequences he could not yet name, guarding against a future he had once promised himself he would never risk. By the fourth morning, Bridget could no longer pretend the strain was temporary. Not to herself. She woke with her breath already shallow, the familiar constriction beneath her ribs tightening before she had even moved. The stays felt heavier than they had the night before, not because they had been drawn tighter, but because her body had begun to resist them. She lay still, one hand resting against the mattress, waiting for the sensation to pass. It did. Slowly. That, too, had become a negotiation. Prudence entered quietly, as she always did, and took one look at her before speaking. "You should not lace today," she said. Bridget turned her face toward the window. "I have guests for luncheon. You can receive them seated." "That is not the point." Prudence crossed the room and rested her hands lightly at Bridget's waist, fingers pausing at the laces without pulling. "This is no longer concealment," she said gently. "It is endurance." Bridget closed her eyes. "I know. And His Grace does not know," Bridget said quickly, "and I will not have him guessing." Prudence did not argue. She loosened the stays as far as propriety would allow, her movements careful, practiced, resigned. When Bridget stood, she waited, longer than she meant to, before taking her first step. Prudence noticed. So did Bridget. The luncheon passed without incident, though it required more effort than she was willing to acknowledge. She remained seated. She spoke less. She smiled carefully. Humphrey watched. He did not hover. He did not question, but his attention did not waver either. Not when she declined a second cup of tea, not when she pressed her palm briefly to the table before rising, not when she drew a breath that took too long to steady. After the guests departed, he approached her where she stood near the hearth. "You're unwell," he said quietly. She shook her head at once. "No." That was not a question. She forced a small smile. "You're observant." "Yes," he replied, and increasingly dissatisfied with my own restraint. Her heart stuttered. "I don't want you to push," she said. "I'm not pushing," he said. "I'm preparing." "For what?" "For the moment when silence ceases to be kind." The words landed heavily between them. "I won't have you feel responsible for me," she said. "I already do," he replied. "That is what marriage is." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not impatience, but fear, not of her, of what might happen if he misstepped. "I need time," she said. He nodded. "Then I will give it to you. But not indefinitely," he finished quietly. Her breath caught. "Not because I demand truth," he added, but because I won't allow you to harm yourself to protect me." That nearly undid her. That night, the stays came off earlier than usual. Bridget sat at the edge of the bed while Prudence loosened the laces, each inch of release bringing a rush of relief sharp enough to leave her light-headed. "This cannot continue much longer," Prudence said softly. Bridget nodded, her hands braced against the mattress. "I know. And when it ends?" Bridget swallowed. "It ends with me speaking," she said. Prudence rested a hand briefly at her back. "He will listen." "Yes," Bridget whispered. "That's what frightens me." Later, alone in the dark, Bridget lay on her side and allowed herself one honest thought. Not of fear, not of consequence, but of truth. She could no longer manage this quietly. And somewhere else in the house, Humphrey stood at the window of his study, watching the lights extinguish one by one, his hands clasped behind his back as though restraint itself required posture. He had promised himself once that he would never risk this kind of future. He had kept that promise for years. Now, something in the house was testing it, and he did not know whether holding fast or letting go would cause the greater harm. By morning, the house had adjusted itself around Bridget. Not openly, not dramatically, but small allowances had been made. A chair placed closer than usual, a tray carried rather than summoned, a door held just a moment longer than etiquette required. Humphrey noticed every one of them. He said nothing. Breakfast was served in the smaller room, the long table left unused. Bridget sat at its nearer end, her posture composed, her hands folded in her lap as though stillness itself required discipline. "You should eat," Humphrey said gently. "I will." He waited. She took a sip of tea instead. He did not press. "I've cancelled the afternoon callers," he said. No explanation was necessary. Her gaze lifted. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." The words settled between them. Simple, deliberate. She reached for the toast this time, took a careful bite. Chewed slowly. It stayed. Humphrey's shoulders eased a fraction before he could stop himself. Later, he walked with her through the long gallery again, not because she asked, but because he had begun to anticipate the moments when standing alone became effort. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, revealing everything and forgiving nothing. Bridget paused midway, her hand resting briefly against the wall. "You don't need to watch me," she said. "I'm not watching," he replied. "I'm accompanying." She smiled faintly at that. They continued. "You're tired," he said after a moment. "I'm managing." He stopped walking. She did too. "Bridget," he said quietly. "Those are not the same thing." Her breath hitched. "I know," she said, "but managing is what I have." He looked at her then, really looked, at the effort beneath the composure, the cost behind the calm. "I don't like this," he said. The honesty startled her more than anger would have. "You don't like what?" she asked. "Not knowing when to step in," he said. "Not knowing whether silence is your choice or your shield." Her heart pounded. "I need it to be my choice," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then I will respect it." She exhaled in relief, too sharply. He noticed. That afternoon, the house was quiet. No visitors. No obligations pressing at the door. Bridget sat near the window with her embroidery, though her fingers moved more slowly than usual. After a while, she set it aside and leaned back, closing her eyes. Humphrey entered without a sound. "You're pale," he said. "I'm fine." "That answer has lost its meaning," he replied gently. She opened her eyes. "I don't want you to change how you see me," she said. His expression softened. Not indulgent, not dismissive. "I don't know how I could," he said. "I only know how I see you now." "And how is that?" "Brave," he said. "And tired." Her throat tightened. He moved closer. Not touching, not claiming. Simply reducing the space between them so that she did not feel alone in it. "If something is costing you this much," he said quietly, "then silence has become a burden I share." Her breath trembled. I didn't mean to make it that way. I know, he said. That's why I'm concerned. She stood, the movement careful and slow. For a moment, she swayed. His hand came up at once, steady at her back, firm, without pressure. That's enough, he said. Sit. She obeyed, not because he commanded, but because he was right. He knelt in front of her then, lowering himself so their eyes were level. I'm not asking for answers, he said. I'm asking you to stop bearing this alone. Tears stung her eyes. Unwelcome, unplanned. I'm afraid, she whispered. Of me? No, she said quickly. Of what changes once things are said. His gaze held hers. Some changes, he said, are not losses. She shook her head faintly. You don't know that. No, he agreed, but I'm willing to find out. That night, Bridget could not sleep at all. The truth pressed close now, not as a threat, but as a presence that no longer accepted delay. And Humphrey, awake in his study, finally allowed himself to name what he had been avoiding all along. Not the fear of knowing, but the fear that knowing would demand he choose between a promise he had once made and a future he had never allowed himself to imagine. The next morning arrived without ceremony. No bells, no visitors, no change the house could point to and name. And yet something had shifted. Bridget felt it the moment she opened her eyes. Not pain, not fear, but a quiet insistence beneath her ribs that no longer tolerated denial. The stays lay folded on the chair where Prudence had left them the night before. Bridget did not reach for them at once. She sat on the edge of the bed, both feet planted firmly on the floor, breathing until the room steadied. Only then did she allow Prudence to help her dress. Looser today, deliberately so. Prudence said nothing, but her hands lingered at Bridget's waist as if committing the moment to memory. You won't manage the stairs twice today, the maid said finally. Bridget nodded. I won't try. That alone felt like surrender. Breakfast was taken in the sitting room. Humphrey entered already aware that something was different. Not because he saw her body, but because he saw her choices. She was seated. The tea was already poured. The stays were not dictating her posture anymore. You're up early, he said. I didn't sleep, she replied. Neither had he. He took the chair opposite her, close enough that conversation did not require effort. You've changed your routine, he said. Yes. A pause. Deliberately? Yes. He studied her face. Not intrusively, not searching for answers, but registering consequence. All right, he said quietly. The word surprised her. That's all, she asked. That's enough, he replied. For now. She wrapped her fingers around the teacup, grateful for its warmth. I don't want to frighten you, she said. He smiled faintly. You're not frightening. You're asking for attention. The honesty startled her. I didn't mean to. I know, he said. That's why I'm listening. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that held rather than avoided. Later, Humphrey did something he had not done in weeks. He cancelled his appointments entirely. No explanations, no substitutions. When Bridget noticed, she looked at him with something like alarm. You don't have to stop the world, she said. I'm not, he replied. I'm narrowing it. That afternoon, the house seemed to exhale. Bridget rested on the chaise by the window, her eyes closed, her breathing uneven but no longer forced into discipline. Humphrey remained nearby, not watching, not hovering, reading without turning the page. When she stirred, he was there. You're awake, he said. I was never fully asleep. Good, he replied. Neither was I. She shifted, then stilled. Humphrey, she said quietly. Yes. If I asked you not to leave the house tonight, he answered without hesitation. I wouldn't. Her chest tightened. And if I asked you not to ask questions, that took longer. I would try, he said honestly, but I won't promise silence if it becomes harmful. She nodded. That's fair. The word fair hung between them. Weighted, almost ironic. She reached for his hand then, not dramatically, not urgently, just enough to feel him there. His fingers closed around hers, warm, steady, then loosened slightly as though reminding himself not to take more than she offered. "I'm close," she said suddenly. He stiffened. To what? To saying something I can't take back. His breath left him slowly. "Then don't say it until you're ready," he said. "But don't disappear inside it either." Tears pricked her eyes. "I'm afraid you'll look at me differently." He lifted her hand, not to his lips, but to rest against his chest, where his heart beat steadily beneath her palm. "I already am," he said, "because you're asking me to stay." Her breath hitched. Outside, the light faded early. Clouds gathered without threat, only wait. As evening approached, Bridget remained where she was, her energy thinning, her composure no longer sharp enough to hide the cost of restraint. Humphrey noticed when she pressed her palm briefly to her side. He did not comment. He simply moved closer. "You don't have to endure this tonight," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "Then choose not to." She closed her eyes. "I will," she said. "Soon." The word soon did not promise time. It promised inevitability. And Humphrey, standing at the edge of everything he had once sworn to avoid, finally understood that restraint, true restraint, was no longer about holding back. It was about choosing which truth he was willing to face first. The night did not bring rest. It brought vigilance. Bridget lay awake, listening to the house settle into its familiar rhythms, doors secured, lamps dimmed, footsteps fading one by one. Normally, the quiet soothed her. Tonight, it pressed. Her body no longer cooperated with denial. Every shift required intention. Every breath carried weight. When she finally sat up, it was not panic that moved her. It was decision. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and waited until the room steadied. The door opened softly behind her. Humphrey did not speak at once. He stood there, fully dressed, coat draped over his arm as though he had been prepared to leave and changed his mind at the last moment. "You're awake," he said. "Yes." He crossed the room slowly, stopping well short of her. "I was going to the study," he said, "but I thought I should check." She nodded. "I'm glad you did." He studied her face. The tiredness she was no longer masking, the careful way she held herself. "You're past managing," he said quietly. She did not argue. "That worries me," he added. "I know." He exhaled, then did something deliberate. He set the coat aside. "I'm not leaving tonight," he said. "Not the room. Not the corridor. Not this." Her heart thudded. "You don't have to stay," she said, even as relief loosened something inside her. "I do," he replied. "Because if I don't, I'll spend the night wondering whether restraint has become negligence." The word startled her. "I would never—" "I know," he said gently. "This isn't about blame." He pulled a chair closer and sat, placing himself where she could see him without effort. "Talk to me," he said. "Not with answers. Just with truth as far as you can manage it." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know how to begin." "Then don't begin," he said. "Just stay." She breathed. Once. Twice. "I thought I could control this," she said finally. "I thought if I stayed composed enough, quiet enough, nothing would change. And now? And now my body has decided otherwise." He did not look away. "You've been hurting yourself," he said softly. She swallowed. "Not intentionally." "I know." The silence stretched. Not empty, not tense, but expectant. "You once told me," she said, "that wanting requires care." "Yes." "What if wanting also requires courage?" His gaze sharpened, not with alarm, but recognition. "Then courage," he said slowly, "is not acting before you're ready." She nodded. "But it is," he continued, acknowledging when readiness is approaching. Her breath trembled. "It's close," she whispered. He leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees. "Then listen to me," he said. very carefully. She looked up. "I'm afraid," he said. "Not of you, not of truth, but of making the wrong choice when it matters." Her chest tightened. "And what do you believe the wrong choice is?" she asked. He hesitated. "Leaving you alone in this," he said. Tears slipped free then. Quiet, unwelcome. "I never meant to," she whispered. "I know," he said again. "That's why I'm still here." She reached for his hand. This time he did not pull back. He held on, not tightly, not possessively, just enough to anchor them both. "You don't have to tell me tonight," he said. "But tomorrow, Bridget. Tomorrow we stop pretending this is sustainable." Her heart raced. "Tomorrow," she echoed. "Yes," he said. "Not because I demand answers, but because silence has begun to cost you more than speech ever could." She closed her eyes. The truth hovered, frightening, necessary, unavoidable. And for the first time she did not push it away. She leaned into his hand instead. Outside, the house stood quiet and watchful. Inside, something fundamental shifted. Not the secret, but the balance that had kept it contained. Morning came slowly. Not with light, but with awareness. Bridget woke with Humphrey's hand still resting loosely over hers, their fingers barely touching where they had fallen during the night. He had not moved closer, he had not withdrawn either. The restraint was deliberate. A quiet agreement held through sleep. She lay still, breathing carefully, listening to the house wake around them. Today was different. Not because something had happened, but because something would. She shifted, testing the room, her body, the truth waiting behind her ribs. The moment she moved, Humphrey stirred. "You're awake," he said. "Yes." He did not sit up at once. He waited, giving her space even now. "Do you want tea?" he asked. "No." That answer surprised them both. She pushed herself upright, pausing until the faint dizziness passed. Humphrey rose immediately, steadying her without speaking. "I'm all right," she said. "I know," he replied. "I'm still here." That was the difference. She crossed the room slowly and stood by the window, her hands braced against the sill. The morning was pale and quiet, the garden bare but orderly. Nothing out of place, except her. "Humphrey," she said. He turned at once. "I need you to listen," she continued. "Not as my husband, not as someone who needs to decide anything, just listen." He nodded. "I can do that." She closed her eyes. For a moment, she said nothing, not because she was hesitating, but because she was choosing her words with care, the way one does when something precious must survive being named. "I agreed to a life with you," she said quietly, believing I understood its boundaries. His chest tightened. "And I did," she added. "At the time." He did not interrupt. "I did not lie," she continued. "I did not betray you. But something has changed. Not in my intent, but in my body." He inhaled slowly. She turned to face him then, her expression steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm carrying a child," she said. The words did not shatter the room. They settled. Humphrey did not move at once. He did not step back. He did not step forward. He simply stood, as though absorbing the weight of what had been spoken required stillness. "A child," he repeated. "Yes." Silence followed. Not emptiness, but recalibration. Bridget watched his face carefully, bracing herself for something, anything. But what she saw instead was restraint tightening into focus. Not rejection, not disbelief. Fear, not of her, of consequence. "I didn't plan this," she said quickly. "I didn't ignore what you asked of me. I believed we were careful enough." "I know," he said at once. That single sentence nearly undid her. "I wanted to tell you sooner," she continued, "but I was afraid that the truth would change how you looked at me." His voice was quiet when he answered. "It has." Her heart dropped. "And how?" she asked. "With concern," he said. "With responsibility. With fear I didn't expect. She swallowed, but not with disappointment. Tears stung her eyes. "You don't have to decide anything now," she said. "I'm not asking for reassurance. I just couldn't carry this alone anymore." He crossed the space between them then, not quickly, not urgently, and stopped an arm's length away. "You should never have been alone," he said. She shook her head. "I chose the silence, and I allowed it," he replied. "That was my mistake." She looked at him sharply. "This isn't your fault." "No," he agreed, "but it is my responsibility now." She searched his face. "You're afraid?" "Yes," he said, "but not of the child." Her breath caught. "Of what, then?" He hesitated, just long enough for her to see that the answer was not ready. "Of what this asks of me," he said finally, "and of whether I'm strong enough to answer it well." That honesty steadied her more than comfort ever could. "I don't expect you to resolve this today," she said. He nodded. "Good, because I can't." A fragile smile touched her lips. "But," he continued, voice firming, "I will not retreat from you, and I will not pretend this is something to endure rather than face." She nodded, tears slipping free now. "Thank you for telling me," he said. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. He did not touch her belly. He did not speak of the future. He simply reached for her hand and held it, openly, deliberately, as though acknowledging that whatever came next would be faced together. Outside, the house went on breathing. Inside, the silence finally broke, not with answers, but with truth spoken and received. And that was enough. They did not speak of it at first, not over breakfast, not as the morning light shifted across the windows, not even when Humphrey cancelled the rest of the day with a single, decisive instruction that required no explanation. They moved carefully around the truth, not avoiding it, but allowing it to settle into the shape of the room. Bridget rested on the chaise by the window, her breathing easier now that she had stopped negotiating every movement. Humphrey remained nearby, a presence rather than a sentinel, his attention steady but not consuming. When he finally spoke, it was not to begin where the story ended. It was to begin where it had never been allowed to start. "There is something you do not know about me," he said quietly. She did not look up at once. "I suspected as much," she replied. He nodded. "You were right too." She turned then, watching him carefully. "Is this something you're ready to say?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yes," he said. "Not because it's easy, but because I can no longer pretend it isn't relevant." She waited. "My family experienced a loss," he began. His voice was steady, but his hands had stilled completely at his sides. "Some years ago." Her breath caught, but she did not interrupt. "It changed us," he continued. "Not all at once. Not in a way that could be contained to one moment. It spread, quietly, into habits, decisions, promises." Her chest tightened at the word. "Promises made in grief," he said, as though reading her thoughts. "They carry more weight than they should." She nodded once. "There was a child," he said. The words landed softly and irrevocably. Bridget's hand curled against the cushion beneath her. "He was loved," Humphrey continued, "deeply. And when he was lost, the damage was not confined to the moment of loss." His voice shifted then, not breaking but thinning, as though it were being drawn through memory rather than sound. "I survived it," he said. "Others did not, in the same way." She did not ask how. She understood that this was not the part he could give her yet. "I learned," he went on, "that closeness carries risk, that wanting something too fiercely can make you careless, or worse, responsible." Her heart ached. "And so," he said, "I chose restraint, not because I believed love was dangerous, but because I believed I was." The honesty stole her breath. "You're not," she said instinctively. He met her gaze. "I know that now, intellectually and emotionally. That," he said, "is still catching up." She reached for him then, Not his hand, but his sleeve. Grounding, deliberate. "You didn't tell me," she said softly, "and yet you shaped our life around it." "Yes." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because grief doesn't ask permission," he said. "And because I didn't trust myself to speak of it without letting it decide for me." She absorbed that in silence. "You never gave me the choice," she said at last. "No," he agreed. "I didn't." The admission carried no defense. "And yet," she continued, "you didn't deny me love." "No. Or care. Never." She studied him, the restraint that had once felt impenetrable now revealing its seams. "You were protecting," she said, "even when protection became a kind of silence." "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "I wish I had known," she said. "So do I," he replied. "But I don't regret loving you as fully as I knew how." Her eyes stung. "Does knowing change how you see me?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "It changes how I see your fear." He nodded, something easing in his shoulders. "There is more," he said, "but not all of it belongs to today." She accepted that. "And what belongs to today?" she asked. He stepped closer, not closing the space entirely, but enough that his presence was unmistakable. "Choosing not to let old grief dictate new life," he said, "even if I'm still learning how." She held his gaze. "You don't have to be certain," she said. "You just have to be honest." He considered her words. Then, carefully, he placed his hand over hers. Not on her abdomen, not claiming what lay beneath, simply anchoring himself to her. "I'm afraid," he said. "I know. But I am also," he added, "willing." That was not a promise. It was something braver. Outside, the house settled into afternoon quiet, as though holding its breath. Inside, the past had finally been named. Not to accuse, not to wound, but to loosen its grip. And somewhere beyond the walls, the weight of unresolved grief stirred, preparing, at last, to be seen. Henrietta arrived without ceremony. No announcement, no pause for permission. The sound of her carriage had barely settled before she was inside the house, removing her gloves with hands that did not quite stop trembling. Travel had not softened her. If anything, it had sharpened her, drawn her lines tight with effort rather than age. Humphrey was the one who met her. Bridget watched from the upper landing, one hand resting on the banister, her body heavy in a way she no longer attempted to disguise. She did not retreat. She did not descend. She waited. Henrietta looked up. The pause that followed was not polite. It was measuring. Then Henrietta inclined her head. Not warmly, not cruelly, acknowledging Bridget as one acknowledges something unavoidable. "You didn't tell me," she said to Humphrey. "I didn't know how," he replied. She exhaled, a sound too sharp to be a laugh. "So it's true," she said. "The house has already decided." Bridget's fingers tightened on the rail. Not at the words, but at the certainty with which they were spoken. "I asked you here," Humphrey said quietly, "because this can't remain unspoken." Henrietta's gaze snapped back to him. "Years of silence, and now you want speech." Bridget descended the stairs then, slowly, deliberately, refusing retreat even as her body protested the movement. Henrietta saw her fully this time. "You're carrying a child," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Bridget replied. Henrietta's gaze dropped, not to Bridget's face, but lower, and for a single, unguarded moment, her composure failed her. She stepped back. Just one step, but it was enough. "A boy," Henrietta said. Bridget did not know how she knew. "Yes." The room tightened. Henrietta turned sharply away, one hand braced against the back of a chair as though the air itself had thickened. "You promised me," she said to Humphrey. "You swore." "I did," he replied. "You looked at what was left of me," she continued, her voice straining now. "And you swore you would never—" "I loved you," Humphrey said. "That promise came from love." "And now?" she demanded. "And now," he said evenly, I will not let grief dictate the rest of my life, or my wife's." Henrietta laughed, broken, disbelieving. "Everything was taken from me," she said. "Everything. And now there is another boy." The word boy landed like something sharp. "I can't look at it," she said suddenly. "I won't." Bridget felt the words strike, but she did not flinch. "That doesn't make you cruel," Humphrey said. "It makes you injured." Henrietta's breath hitched just once, before she masked it. "I'm not leaving," she said abruptly. Humphrey looked at her. "You don't have to decide anything today." "I do," she replied. "And I'm deciding to stay." She turned to Bridget, not hostile now, but guarded, shaken. "I won't touch the child," she said, "and I won't pretend this is something I'm ready for." "I wouldn't ask you to," Bridget replied. Henrietta studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, sharply, as though accepting terms she did not like but could not refuse. She left the room soon after, not fleeing, not healed, but no longer pretending distance was possible. Behind her, the house absorbed the fracture quietly, and for the first time in years, grief that had been frozen solid had been forced into motion. The baby was 6 weeks old when Henrietta first touched him. Not at birth, not in the days after. 6 weeks of proximity without contact. By then, the house had learned a new rhythm. Bridget moved more freely again. The careful slowness had softened into recovery. The child was no longer the fragile uncertainty of his first days. He watched now, tracked light, stilled when held upright against a shoulder. Henrietta remained. She did not announce her intention. She simply stayed. She took her meals on the same floor as the nursery. She adjusted her walks to coincide with the hours the child slept. She listened when the nurse spoke. Not warmly, not eagerly, but attentively. She never asked to hold him, and she never left the house. The near miss came quietly. It was late afternoon. Bridget rested. Humphrey had stepped out briefly. The nurse had gone only as far as the adjoining room. Henrietta passed the nursery doorway and stopped. The child lay still. Too still. Something in Henrietta reacted before thought could intervene. She crossed the room at once and lifted him, adjusting his position with hands that did not shake. The boy stirred. His eyes opened. He looked at her. Nothing shattered. Nothing vanished. He simply breathed, steadier now, his small fingers curling reflexively against her sleeve. Henrietta closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she did not move away. "He needs to be upright," she said quietly when the nurse returned. "Just like this." After that, she did not retreat. She did not claim him. She did not speak of love. But she noticed everything. If the room was too warm, if the light was too sharp, if the child slept too long or not long enough, care disguised as vigilance. Weeks passed. The first time she left the room while Humphrey held the baby, she did not watch him do it. That was when Humphrey knew, not that she was healed, but that she was no longer afraid of surviving love. One evening, Humphrey found her by the fire. "You stayed," he said. "Yes." "For him?" She considered. "For myself," she said finally. "And because leaving would mean choosing death again." He nodded. Bridget watched them later from the doorway, the child warm and solid against her chest. The house no longer braced for loss. The past had not been erased, but it had loosened its hold. And that, she knew now, was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, not replacing, but staying, long enough for life to prove it could endure.
I loved you before the sky went dark, before the silence learned our names. I felt the weight upon my heart, but never questioned why I stayed.
I loved you when I couldn't speak, when truth felt sharper than the pain. I carried storms you couldn't see, afraid my grief would make you break.
This was love in the storm, not love after it passed, not a promise made easy, but a vow meant to last. When the world shook our ground and we trembled inside, I loved you in the storm, I loved you. I kept my fear inside my chest, not to deceive but to protect. I thought if I could carry this, your heart would never feel the wreck.
And I kept ghosts behind my eyes, believing distance was my care. I thought restraint would keep us safe if love was handled like a prayer.
This was love in the storm, when the truth had sharp edges, when silence felt kinder than words we regretted, even lost in the dark, even breaking inside. I loved you in the storm, I loved you all the time. I love you, I love you, I love you.
We suffered not because we failed, but because love was something real.
Some hearts don't break from lack of care, they break from feeling far too deep.
I never stopped loving you, not for a breath, not for a doubt. Even when fear was all I knew, my love was never walking out. Love doesn't leave when the sky falls down, it doesn't vanish when we're afraid. It waits in the wreckage, steady and sound, until truth finds the courage to stay.
This was love in the storm, when we couldn't see through, when we hurt each other, trying not to, and the night held its breath while our hearts learned to fight. I loved you in the storm,
I loved you every night. Now the storm has lost its hold, but love was never what it took. It lived through every breaking wave, it never needed calm to stay. This is love after the storm,
still the first and the last, from the first breath of love to the last breath we draw. I loved you in the storm, and I love you still more. Before the truth, before the pain, before the world could call our names, I loved you then.